Okay guys, so next I want you to do one more small thing, which is to create a bar chart, and this time we want to add error bars to that bar chart which show us the standard deviation of what we're interested in. So first of all, we're going to need the average and standard deviation of trees with ivy, in addition to what we've got here, which is those values for the trees without ivy. Okay, so using what I showed you about dragging formulas and locking the range in place, I would like you to give me the average of trees with ivy growing on them, so the average of all of these values here, and then also the standard deviation, so using the stdev function, but for these values rather than these, and then we will go from there. Okay, so hopefully what you've done here is you've taken this field here, which gives you the average for trees without ivy, you've dragged the formula to the left, and then you get the average of trees with ivy, with ivy. And then you did the same for standard deviation, dragged this across, and now it gives it to you for this value here. In order to get these with just 2 decimal places, because I always ask you to round to 2 decimal places, we just switch to number and it automatically rounds for us. Okay, so now I know that this is the mean and this is the standard deviation, okay, for both of these trees with ivy, trees without ivy. What I'd like to do now is I would like to put these into a graph. And I showed you before that in order to produce a graph, we usually highlight the cells we want included in the graph. And ideally, we also already want to highlight the names for the different variables that we're going to show. And this gives me an opportunity to show you a nice little trick using your keyboard about selecting cells. Okay, so one thing you can do is obviously you can select a whole range of cells like this. But what if you want to just select these and then nothing in between, and then you want to select these cells right here? If you wanted to do that, and in this case that's actually exactly what we want to do, you can use the control button on your keyboard. Okay, so very bottom left of your keyboard, CTRL, control, you highlight the first 2 cells, these here, you press control on your keyboard, you keep that pressed, you scroll up, and then you highlight these 2 cells up here. And what you've done now is you've highlighted 2 sets of cells here, but with spaces in between. Okay, you can actually do that for any sort of number of cells that you want to highlight, but not what you don't want to highlight anything in between. So for example, I click on this one, I press control on my keyboard, I keep control pressed, and then I highlight this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. Okay, so all it does is essentially it only then highlights and adds to my selection the cells that I click on. I can click on a whole range and it will add them to my selection. Okay. The other trick that you can do with your keyboard is if you wanted to, let's say, select all of the cells in this column from the top all the way to the bottom, I've showed you you can either do that by highlighting all of the cells like this, or actually highlight the first and then press shift on your keyboard. Okay, so that's directly above the control button. You go to the last cell in the range, you press shift, you keep shift pressed, and you click on that cell, and it will highlight everything in between those cells. Okay, the same happens if you, let's say, highlight these 2, and then you press shift and you highlight these 2. Then it will select all of the cells in between the first and the last selection. Okay, but what we want to do now is highlight, first of all, the names for the 2 variables that we're going to put into our graph. So these 2 cells here, C and D1. Then we scroll all the way down to our averages, which we've calculated. We press control, so bottom left on your keyboard, keep it pressed, highlight these 2, and now we've got what we need for our bar chart. We then go to Insert, we select the simple bar, and there we go. Okay, so this is the graph we want to produce. But what we're going to do now, in addition to what you learned last week, is we're going to add error bars to this. So as I've explained in the lecture, a bar chart you should usually represent with the height of the bars, the average, which is in this case 67.09, and in this case it's 42.63. Okay, so those are our averages that we've collected. But then in the bars, in the error bars, on top of those bars, we should show the spread of the data. So how far on average is each of those values in the data set from this mean? And we do that in graphs using error bars. So if you highlight the bars themselves, so you click on either this one or this one to make sure that they are selected here, okay? And then when we're in the chart design tab up here, we go to add chart elements. You've seen this before. This is where we can also add axis titles, for example. But in this case, we want to add error bars. And we don't want to use what we've got here because Excel will not be able to calculate the standard deviation correctly based on the information we've given it in the chart, because all we've given Excel is the actual average. We need to go to down here, more error bar options, and actually specify what the standard deviation is. When you go to this more error bar options, it brings up the format error bar tab on the right hand side. We then scroll down. We want to make sure we're in this symbol here, error bar options. We go to custom, we select that, we go to specify value. And now it brings up this little pop-up box here. And for both the positive and the negative values, we now need to select the standard deviations that we calculated previously. Okay, so starting with the positive value, we click on this little arrow here, we scroll down to where we've calculated our standard deviations, and we select them both. Okay, we then click on this arrow again to log that selection, and we do the same for the negative value. Again, highlight both of these, enter the selection, and press OK. And now what's happened is we've now got these error bars added to our bar chart, and this is how you should always present numerical data when you have calculated an average. And standard deviation should be in an error bar, in a bar chart, including error bars that show the standard deviation.